Because I think sometimes parents get on this shame spiral where they try something and then, nobody gets on board, or their husband makes fun of them for trying, or, something happens and then they give up. But what we need to do is just be steadfast, be faithful, be consistent. And when we, get over the shame and just keep trying, it's okay if you make a mistake. It's okay if you, forget to do that good habit for a week, or you don't do it very well, whatever the habit is, but just do it again. Just keep doing it again and again, because it's those little seeds that make the big difference.
Welcome back, intentional parents. I'm Katie Kimball from Kids Cook Real Food, your host of the Healthy Parenting Handbook podcast. It's the thing we all said we needed when our little ones were first born, right? Where's the handbook for this? It's such a crazy time trying to raise little ones, then trying to raise toddlers, all the way to teens. It just seems like we need new chapters all the time. And that's what I do here. I bring together experts in the fields of health, parenting, nutrition, and more to help you parents who truly want to raise healthy, independent kids, get the information you need. I firmly believe that parenting is the toughest and the most rewarding job in the world. So thank you for joining me to consult this Healthy Parenting Handbook, your guide to raising kids intentionally. My guest today is Jennifer Pepito, author of Habits for a Sacred Home and founder of The Peaceful Press and host of the Restoration Home podcast. Jennifer and I talk about counterbalancing the chaos that we're all feeling in the world and the fast-paced nature of our screen-based lives with a peaceful home. This is a podcast for really any parent who finds that an attractive idea, who wants a more peaceful home. Jennifer is a homeschooling Christian, but you don't have to be homeschooling or Christian to benefit from our conversation today. Let me officially introduce you a little more to Jennifer. She is on a mission to help moms overcome fear and live with wonder and purpose. And her homeschool curriculum empowers this through heroic stories, heartwarming poetry, and engaging life skills development, which of course caught my eye because we're all about life skills here at Kids Cook Real Food. Jennifer Pepito's resources help create joyful memories among families, which leads to deeper connections and lasting relationships. My friends, I want relationships with my kids. I want my kids to have relationships with their siblings, and that is part of what today is going to lay the foundation for. Jennifer hosted the Wild and Free podcast for 7 years and has made guest appearances on other popular podcasts such as 1,000 Hours Outside, At Home with Sally, and Read Aloud Revival. And of course, now she's on the Healthy Parenting Handbook, so I'm like in with all those big dogs, right? Sure. Jennifer lives in the mountains with her beloved family, including 7 children, where she enjoys reading aloud, working in her garden, and watching the sunset. And actually, as you'll hear in our conversation, she's only got 3 children left at home and has fully launched 4 of them. This is, I think, just a heartwarming and encouraging conversation, and I cannot wait for you to hear it. Let's jump right in. Well, welcome, Jennifer. Thank you so much for being here. And I'm absolutely fascinated by the topic of your book and all that you do to help families out. So I think this will be a great conversation today.
I'm so looking forward to it, Katie. Thanks for having me.
Well, I know you're really well known in the homeschool world. So let's talk a little bit about that. But of course, we're not talking about just homeschool stuff today. So stick around no matter how you school your kids. But what is your story? How did you decide to homeschool your own kids and then wanting to really go out into the world and teach others?
Yeah, I really love being with my children. I was so excited about being a mom and I made myself a student actually of motherhood. And as I was doing that, homeschooling came on my radar, partly through people we went to church with. This was a family who was just the most connected and engaged, and their kids really seemed like they loved the parents and vice versa. And it gave me a vision for what our family life could look like that was so exciting to me. And so 27 years ago, I set out to homeschool my first child, and I've been doing it ever since, and just really love the relationships that have been built and the opportunity we have to discuss things and really grow as people in the midst of this kind of Socratic atmosphere of reading and talking about great books together.
Oh, nice. And you homeschooled before it was cool, for sure, 27 years ago. I love that you saw something so attractive in that family at church and you just thought, I want that. And I think a lot of us hope, whether we're people of faith or whether we're people who love learning, like we all want someone to look at our family and go, oh, I want that. Like, what do they have? What a beautiful story. Before we get too far, I want to assure the audience, Jennifer, do you think we'll chat today about topics that apply to non-homeschoolers as well?
Of course, absolutely. Because my books, I have two books, Mothering by the Book and Habits for a Sacred Home. And in both cases, they are not written specifically to homeschoolers, but rather to moms who are dealing with the problems that most moms have.
And you said you made yourself a student of motherhood. And I find that very attractive. Like when I see someone who says, I want to be an intentional parent and learn more about this, I'm like, yeah, I want that too. So, I hope other people see that in you for sure. There was a line in your bio that jumped right out at me because you say you want to help moms overcome fear. And I'm a curious cat. So I'm like, well, what do you think parents are so afraid of right now?
I think moms are just naturally fearful, unfortunately. Like all of a sudden we have this person who we care about so much and who is somewhat defenseless. And it brings up a lot of fears. In Mothering by the Book, I talk about the fear of not doing enough, the fear of not being able to manage, the fear of, sometimes even the fear of being alone or the fear of making mistakes. There's just so many little fears. But right now, I think there's some bigger fears. There are wars happening in the world. I think that is very scary for moms. Groceries are double what they were a couple years ago. I think that is very scary for moms. So there's a lot of things I think that are really amplifying the fear that we maybe already naturally lean towards as mothers.
Well, and we talk a lot about social media and how that whole platform, that whole experience amplifies our fears, not only as moms, but for our kids, our teens, especially. Do you have any thoughts on social media and those fears that we should talk about?
Oh, 100%. I was telling my daughter, I checked Twitter last night before I went to bed. And the big story right now is that migrants in Ohio from Haiti are killing cats. It's not funny. It's horrifying. It's horrifying. And even a little bit it could be a little terrifying. Even there are things in the world right now that are definitely feel a lot bigger, and being on social media amplifies what already feels big. And I think it is really important. In Habits for a Sacred Home, I talk about how in some ways we have to just make our world a little bit smaller, because a lot of these things, like I can't do anything about Haitian migrants in Ohio. I can't do anything about inflation and the grocery prices doubling. But what I can do is just be as present and peaceful to my own children, my own family as possible in order to at least create a refuge here, and I am a believer. And so I lean heavily on scripture for my hope for the future. And Psalm 37 has just been an incredible encouragement to me in that there's a promise there that, yeah, there's going to be troubles, but the meek will inherit the earth and delight themselves in the abundance of peace. And so I really find so much comfort in knowing that, things might look a little dark right now, but God wins and he promises peace for us. And so we kind of just have to, there's a verse also that says he who endures to the end will be saved. And that's a pretty good verse to live by in many ways.
So spot on. And we all crave that peace right now. I will say that in our community, in the wake of the school shootings last week, we actually had no school yesterday because of a potential threat. And so the amount of fear that I could kind of feel through parents and staff and kids. And I asked my kids, would you want to go to school, before we knew it was canceled, but we knew there was a threat? And they said, yeah. And I said, have you ever thought about what you would do if there was a real situation, a lockdown situation in your school? And my daughter, 16-year-old, said, there's only one thing you can do, Mom, and that's pray. Like, that's the right answer. And that's why I don't want to live scared. And we would have sent our kids had there been school, but I think it would have been a skeleton crew with both staff and students, because too many people are living in the now, and they're worried about the now, and they're worried about happiness instead of eternity, where I think, you just pray and keep stepping on through life. So a sacred home is a great place to begin that life of peace and avoiding fear. Tell us, how do you define a sacred home?
Yeah, I think it can be scary to people. It can sound like, oh, sacred. Like we watch Arrested Development. How sacred is that? But I think it's more about the attitude. Sacred means consecrated. And so to me, like my home is consecrated to God. And yes, we are humans living in it, and we're going to make mistakes in it, and it's going to be messy sometimes if we try to figure out even what it looks like to be consecrated to God. But our home and our hearts are consecrated to God, and so we will continue working towards that, that application in a way. And that's what the book is all about, is just really like, it's about the rule of Saint Benedict. He lived during the Dark Ages. He, lived in a time where the barbarians were running around and stealing everything and killing people, and it was terrible. And he set up this rule of life that they would live by, just a set of values that they would live by. And then he created a movement of people living by this set of values. And so it was so encouraging to see that in the midst of that chaos they lived through, they created order. And many people say that monastic movement saved Western civilization because they were copying the scriptures, or because they were copying ancient recipes, or saving art, or saving the texts, not even Christian texts, that they saved civilization. I just see that parallel for us as moms, as we save some old practices, like having meal around a table. That's somewhat revolutionary today. And yet it is so effective for preventing all kinds of antisocial behaviors. Things like growing some of your own food. Like, it's not normal. It's not done like across the board. And yet there are so many benefits to our mental health and our physical health when we just go outside together and put our fingers in the dirt. Things like reading out loud together, something so sort of normal, and yet hardly anybody does it anymore. And it has this power to convey ideas and virtue and beauty that most television shows frankly aren't doing. And so there are so many sort of revolutionary behaviors, or world-saving even behaviors, that I highlight in Habits for a Sacred Home, that are kind of normal, but I think that we've underestimated how powerful they are, and then maybe not done them because we don't recognize how important they are.
Well, and because they're not so common anymore. You kind of said, oh, it's not that normal that people do this. And it's absolutely normal, right? We're created to do all these wonderful habits, but it's not common anymore because of so many distractions. I'm an old soul too. So I love that you just described, old fashioned traditional practices as revolutionary. we have to jolt people's brains. Like, they're kind of revolutionary and kind of not. Yeah. You share 9 habits in your book. Maybe we can get a little peek, a taste of 1 or 2 today. What do you think?
For sure. Yeah. So a couple of them that come right to mind are simplicity and stability. And in the book, I actually parallel different women of faith who did a lot of life saving or world saving. Like, one of them, for instance, is Edith Schaefer. And she was living in the mountains in Switzerland. Her husband was a pastor, and they were hosting students who had questions about the world and about faith and about culture. And so she was doing all kinds of cooking and cleaning. Like, she would, make a big batch of bread and serve it to the students. And then they'd clean up the tea, and they'd have to make dinner. And just like, she was working really hard. And that is one of the values that's highlighted in the book, is work. But her efforts, like she ended up writing, I think, 10 to 15 books, several books about family life and about faith. But not just that, her daughter has written 2 of the most like kind of seminal books for many homeschool families. And so and then their ministry impacted many other ministers as well. People like Os Guinness, who wrote a book about margin. There's so many other people who were also impacted by their work. And so she was, I'm sure in the moment, just thinking, oh my gosh, I'm just doing more dishes and cooking more food for these people and cleaning again. And I'm sure in the moment it might have felt pretty mundane and unimportant. And yet the place that they created, the home they created, had a huge impact on people around the world, who many of them would be in places of influence. Amy Carmichael, we talk about prayer with that habit. Her movement of rescuing girls and praying for people being trafficked is still happening today. Ruth Bell Graham, another one. I talk about her in the form of stability. She created this home, this refuge for her family. Her husband was a traveling minister, and her son today, who was like a troubled kid for a moment, is the leader of this huge sort of philanthropic organization that helps people in crisis. And so, the little things that some of these women were doing, just, having simplicity, not managing their time well, showing some stability, not being flighty and just changing every day what you plan on doing and what your values are for the day. Some of these core values, stability, simplicity, hospitality, community, order, work. These are some of the ones that I mentioned in the book. When you see them in the lives of these women, you see the impact they had. It's easy to see how us adopting some of these values and then the habits that correspond with them can be so impactful in culture today.
I felt like a settling in my system when you were telling that first story about cooking and cleaning. And I think, especially with social media, it's very easy for us to complain, for us to feel like our work is a burden and it's repetitive, et cetera, et cetera. But I agree. I love that St. Benedict says, my work is my prayer and my prayer is my work. If we can see that value in what we do, even if it feels repetitive or even if it feels, kids are ungrateful or whatever, to hear those stories of the fruit that comes from just staying the course, right? And lifting up our work. That's
I
beautiful.
bet for you and me both, like we both have online businesses. And so we both have to be somewhat engaged with our phones and our computers. For me, it's a relief to clean my house. Like getting and, putting a little bit of effort into making some good sourdough waffles or baking some bread or making a meal that my family really loves or cleaning out the kitchen sink. Like those things actually are so much more comfortable they're so good for our soul. There's something about working with our hands and not being on a screen that is so settling for our nervous system. And I think, I hope people who are struggling with maybe managing their screen time, I hope they'll just start adopting some little hobbies like that, like a little bit of gardening or a little bit of baking, a little bit of housework. Because I know many people don't have a lot of kids to take care of. They don't have a big household of guests that's coming in and out. And so it can feel like, well, I'll just get something from Trader Joe's or, it doesn't really matter what I eat or what my house looks like because I don't have a family here. But I think we can't underestimate the power, even in culture. Like my daughter, she was living as a student in the UK. She was a single girl at the time. And she created a home. Like she, would bake sourdough bread and invite other students over. And she would propagate plants and fill her house with her little, student apartment with plants, and really created an atmosphere that was life-giving to her and her community. And so I think we can't underestimate, even for, women who maybe don't have the joy in the moment of taking care of a family, whether you're past that season or before that season, there's still so much personal joy and peace that comes from caring for our homes and our surroundings.
I guarantee all your daughter's fellow students felt like that was a safe, peaceful place. Like she created a home. That's so lovely. And you gave her the skills to do so, might I point out. And let's just talk about life skills here, because I would guess that the majority, maybe 9 in 10 college students, maybe more, don't have the skills your daughter had. You mentioned propagating plants, making sourdough, decorating. Like these are just things that are not necessarily taught. What's your philosophy on life skills, and do you have any hacks to pass those on to our kids?
I'm so glad you asked, my goodness, because so there's a homeschool pioneer. His name was Raymond Moore, and him and his wife had a philosophy that education should be sort of like a coalition of work and service and study. So they didn't think that education should just be all brain work. And I, in my peaceful press work, wholeheartedly agree, because so much of reading comprehension and motor development comes for our children when they engage in practical life skills. So in my homeschool curriculum, we actually have a cookbook. We have children do a recipe every week. We have them do things even like dusting furniture or folding clothes. Those develop valuable motor skills in children, but also it helps them live a civilized life someday. Like, do you want your children to have to pay for every other service they get and not really be able to create any kind of a home? Or do you want them to be able to know how to hammer a hammer or know how to, maybe repair something or some mechanics or even grow flowers just for the sake of beauty? And so those are actually weekly lesson plans in my literature-based homeschool resources because they are so important for a whole and balanced life.
Hey, hi. Quick interruption from Katie. I know you're a parent, so you're used to those. I just wanted to let you know that if you are inspired at all to get in the kitchen with your kids this holiday season, this very busy November, December, I've got a couple deals for you. First, right now, we are offering our holiday baking challenge as a double deal. First of all, it's usually $35 slashed to $19, and it's BOGO, which means you can buy this 7-video set teaching your kids some basic baking skills, as well as a couple pumpkin-themed recipes for November. You can teach your kids, and then you can gift the same class to a friend or family member. I'm picturing cousins getting together on Zoom, learning a couple skills in baking and sending grandma pictures of what everyone has made. Wouldn't that be so fun? So this is a BOGO discount running from November 5th through December 3rd. Be sure to watch for our separate Black Friday sale. I can't tell you what that is, but it's going to be juicy. And then we're going to have a little choose your own week, but you get a month thing going on in December for Life Skills Now Season 3. So check for all of those on our homepage or hop on our email list. If you want that BOGO Holiday Baking Challenge discount, go right away to kidscookrealfood.com/baking deal. That's kidscookrealfood.com/baking deal, all smashed together, no dashes or slashes. Now back to the show.
And so those are actually weekly lesson plans in my literature-based homeschool resources because they are so important for a whole and balanced life.
I love that. Can you give, I know my audience in particular, because I run the Life Skills Now summer camp, is super into life skills, creating independent kids. What practical tip can you sneak something out of your curriculum? Like if someone wants to teach folding laundry or making sourdough, how do you get the kids on board? Where do you start, Jennifer?
I mean, I think kids are always on board. Especially, my biggest tip really is just start them young, because when kids are young, it's all play to them. And so I would give, when I was baking bread, I would give my children a little bit of their own dough to knead, and they would get to shape their own little loaf and put it on the pan. Or if I was baking sugar cookies, I would let them help cut them out or let them help roll them out, and definitely help decorate. If we were, if we were doing some nature study or arranging flowers or planting, even if I was planting the garden, I would give them seeds to plant or give them their own little pot to plant in. As much as possible and as early as possible, I would include my children in the work. And, obviously, if you want them to do work with quality and detail, you're going to have to teach that and inspect that. And that might take some time. But the investment is worth it. I live with 3 of my children. So I have 7 children, but there's just 3 living at home still. And, they can all cook meals. They can all do their own laundry. Everybody contributes to the cleaning of the house. So it's the work is completely balanced. Now I'm not the sole caretaker of my home anymore. And everybody puts in some effort to make it a place where at the drop of a hat, we could host people. It's life skills. It's so basic, but also so important. I think it does start when they're young, because if you shoo them out of the kitchen and get away, you're bothering me, you're in the way when they're little, then when they're older, they're not going to think that you would want to be around them. And they've already probably developed attachments to other things like their iPad, and they're not going to be as interested as in hopping in the kitchen with you.
Well, and I know you and I would agree on the fact that, yes, it's a time investment, but so worth it. And you alluded to that, talking about the trophy that you have now, where your kids know what to do, and whether they're in your home or in their own home, they're capable. And that's huge for you. You're saving way more time now, I guarantee, Jennifer, than you spent when they were 5 and 6 and 7. Plus, that's high quality bonding time.
And even my sons, I have several sons who live on their own, and even my sons care about their atmosphere now. My single sons have house plants, or they'll vacuum up after a spill. My sons don't live in squalor, and it's partly because we didn't live in squalor. Do you know what I mean? We not only set up an atmosphere that they could acclimate to, so we set up a culture, but also we included them in the work of maintaining the culture, and so they know how to do it. So it really does make a difference.
Oh yeah, and you're reaping many rewards right now, as are your kids, and your grandkids will reap those rewards as well when they come along. Of course, we got to talk about cooking. You kind of mentioned the kitchen quickly. for you, how does the kitchen and food and that act of preparing it together play a role in that peaceful home and the way you raise your kids?
Partly it plays a role in developing community, because if we want to have strong communities with shared values that will support each other, you have to break bread together. And I think sometimes we underestimate how that starts with the home. That starts with your own immediate family and even your extended family. Like, I think in a way, as Americans, we've, in many ways dismissed our extended family and, been all about like, oh, boundaries and my family this, my family that. But someday our kids are going to grow up and they're going to model what we did. Like, do we want our children to invite us over for Christmas, or do we want them to say, oh, you're kind of not my favorite people, so you can't come over this year? Do you know what I mean? And that does happen a lot in American culture, where and I know sometimes there's toxic relatives you just can't have around. But I think often it's just personality differences or difference of application, or maybe you're annoyed that your mother tells you to clean up your bedroom. I don't know. And so I think, for sure it starts with just being hospitable to your own children, your own family, gathering together, and maybe it's not like, I do a lot of very simple, very boring meals. I'm not known for being like this amazing cook, but also we have our Passover meal every year. And that is like this really precious tradition. We have, and I'm not Jewish. We do it as a Christian celebration, but then we also have this like really special Christmas breakfast tradition where I make, homemade cinnamon rolls. And these are anchor points in the year that my family can count on, that we're going to gather. The table's going to be set. It's going to be beautiful. And this is not an everyday thing for me, but every Sunday I make a meal and I invite all my adult children who live close by to come over for dinner. If people are in my home, we'll cook something and serve it to them. And so I think just not being afraid of simple meals, if that's what it takes to get your family gathered around the table, not being afraid to have people pitch in. We were making tacos the other night. We were frying the shells. I had my son fried a few shells. My husband fried a few shells. Like, it was a group effort, and so not being afraid to pull in people to help with the jobs is important as well.
I love that you said breaking bread together transmits values, and even just the thought of building community within our own family unit, and then yes, extended family too. I don't know if that's something that people always think about, creating that culture in your home. Tell us a little more about the sacred home and some of those benefits, how it feels for you, for your family, and what are the fruits of the sacred home?
I love that. I think partly it's just that as a family, we are creating space to experience the presence of God. And, the Bible says in his presence is fullness of joy, and at his right hand are pleasures forevermore. And I think, so many people look for some kind of pleasure or meaning, like in their online work or in their outside engagements or things like that. But if we can't be still, even by ourselves in our own home, and just be with God and rest in God, we're not going to be a very still place for our children to, feel at rest, or for our community to come and feel at rest. And so I think, it was interesting because I wrote the book Habits for a Sacred Home, and it's all about the rule of St. Benedict. But St. Benedict first lived in a cave by himself for 3 years and really experienced the presence and power of God before he created this rule of life. And then even in his rule of life, there's all kinds of accommodations for, special needs and special times, because the rules aren't the important thing. What's important is the presence of God. And sometimes having some rules or values or habits in place is what makes more space for that. When we're always saying yes to everything and we're always running in and out of the house and just dumping our crap all over the place, and when we're never thoughtful about how we spend our days, then we don't make time to let God into hard places and let him into soft places, and be thoughtful and be, led by the Spirit in some ways in what we do. And when we are led by the Spirit, there's more peace, there's more joy, there's more freedom, there's more connection as a family, because it's like, connection with our children creates better outcomes. When our children feel loved by us, when we take time to look them in the eyes and hug them, things like that, they feel more loved by us. And then they grow up and they're more responsible. Well, what we're doing when we create this sacred home, this consecrated home, is we're actually giving ourselves permission and space to be connected to God, to look God in the eyes, to let God come near and hold us or comfort us, which can't be done if we're just always rushing around busy and overscheduled and looking at our phones all the time.
A peaceful home is a safe space and a safe feel. I was just reading an article about a study on adult children who stay in the church and what did those parents do right? Fascinating. And it was, yes, weekly attendance at church, yes, family prayer, but not just that. It was those families for whom faith was warm, who hugged a lot, where faith was integrated into all of their values, and it was a positive thing, and not just that list of rules or that list of, scary, we're scared to offend God kind of feel. And I love that you just encapsulated that so well, and I think for people of faith, for sure, that's what we all want. Like, I want my kids to stay in the faith and to get to heaven someday. Like, that's, if I do nothing else, I need 4 for 4 on that because I have 4 kids.
Yeah, amen to that. Yeah, but I think it is more of an invitation, and it's tricky because I think the Protestant church has, and I mean, the church at large has been guilty of probably watering down the rules to some degree in an effort to make the net wider. But the problem is some of these rules actually create more of that peace and joy, and so it is a really tricky balance, because if we completely let go all the habits in favor of just emotional experiences, we probably won't have the character to make space for the emotional experiences. Because to experience God means that you put in the discipline of reading the word or making time to be with him, or, going out in nature when it'd be easier to just be on your phone, or being in solitude when it'd be easier to just be partying all the time. And so, the rules do make space for the encounters or the experiences, and we need both. But I think, unfortunately, a lot of parents have overstated the rules in fear instead of creating an invitation for their children that this is an opportunity to be with someone who loves you even more than I love you.
That's so special, that rules are an invitation and an opportunity. That's so positive and expansive, right? And welcoming, instead of rules being a list of fear-based items, right? And you're definitely my people, because I also agree that we can't just water it down. We can't just say, well, come on in. Like, God did say this, but it's probably okay if we bend it. Like, no, God created us. He knows what will be good for us. And that's why he puts the rules in place. Same as parents, right? That's why we need to give our kids boundaries to help them feel safe. And because we know what's good for them, because our brains are fully formed.
It's so true, Katie. And that is one of the heartbreaking things in our culture today, is how many things that are actually very destructive to the future of an individual person, completely destructive, are being okayed by culture because that's what that person wants in the moment when their brain's not even developed. So it is just very heartbreaking to see.
Yeah. Parents need to be intentional. They need to be firm, right? We've got to set our boundaries. We don't need to be our kids' friends. And I wonder, one of the questions that I thought of while I was looking at your sacred home information was, are there lies that people encounter when they try to create a sacred home, or obstacles?
For sure. In my Restoration Home community group, we talk a lot about 1% improvement, because I think sometimes parents get on this shame spiral where they try something and then nobody gets on board, or their husband makes fun of them for trying, or, something happens and then they give up. But what we need to do is just be steadfast, be faithful, be consistent. And when we, get over the shame and just keep trying, it's okay if you make a mistake. It's okay if you, forget to do that good habit for a week, or you don't do it very well, whatever the habit is, but just do it again. Just keep doing it again and again, because it's those little seeds that make the big difference.
So to bring that down to the practical, as I'm listening to you, if I don't have a house full of plants that are actually alive, I'm not a failure?
No, you can try again. Try with the pothos.
Perfect. But no, I'm just trying to apply what you're saying, is we don't have to seek perfection.
No.
You don't have to do it all. You certainly don't have to do it all at once, because that's a recipe for failure and overwhelm, right? But just take some small steps. Well, Jennifer, this has been uplifting, encouraging, and enlightening. And I'm very practical. I love to leave parents with that one practical step that they can do as step number one. What would you say that someone could implement like today when they finish listening to this podcast?
Yeah, I think probably step number one is just making sure you're looking each child in the eyes every day, because our children will not respond to our values if they don't feel noticed by us. And so just taking a minute to, and I'm not saying a virtual minute, but taking some time each day to look your children in the eyes and reassure them that they are loved. And even for yourself to look God in the eyes and, receive the love that he has for you. If we start with love, then the habits are a joy to implement. But if we start with the habits when there's disconnection, then people don't respond to our values.
And that is just lovely. And that's going to make our parenting, our discipline easier, because kids won't need to be attention seeking if we're already giving them attention.
Exactly.
It's going to help our kids who are traditionally schooled or out of the home schooled to behave better at school, because they know that they have a safe place to come home where they don't need to seek attention because it's given to them.
Yeah.
And they know what God's like.
Yeah.
Right? That God is our father, our parent, and that he's going to give them love like we give them love. Good job, Jennifer Pepito. I love that stuff. And it's so practical and simple, but not always easy because we live in that fast-paced world.
Yeah.
Right? Do you have a hack at all for your brain to remember to do that? Like before it's a habit? I'm sure for you it's a habit now.
Yeah, I keep habit trackers. When I'm working on a new habit, I actually have, in several of the planners and planning pages that I put out in my community group, I have habit trackers, and I'll put things on there like take my vitamins or look my children in the eyes, or, and in our Restoration Home community group, we actually have a new set of habits that goes out every week. We work on the same set for a month at a time, but each week there's a habit checklist that goes out, because some of these things, like we would forget to look our kids in the eyes if we weren't reminded. Some of these things are hard when we're trying to get food on the table and get the grocery shopping done and all these other things. Some things can get overlooked, and then we don't recognize how impactful they are. And so for sure, I recommend, make a reminder on your phone, set an alarm, have a habit tracker in some way, remind yourself, because it's hard to remember everything that needs to be done.
Yeah, that is so practical. You're my people, Jennifer. Friends, find Jennifer at the Restoration Home podcast. Look up her books, Habits for a Sacred Home.
The peacefulpress.shop is a great place to connect, because my podcast, my books, and my homeschool curriculum is all listed there at the peacefulpress.shop.
Perfect. And we will link to that wherever we share this podcast video or interview. Thank you so much for gracing us with your presence today, Jennifer.
Thanks so much for having me today, Katie. What a joy.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Healthy Parenting Handbook podcast. I hope your brain feels fed and your heart feels full, and that you feel connected, knowing that there are other parents on this journey with you. We're just trying to raise healthy, independent adults. And the next time you think, man, there is no handbook for this job. Now there is the Healthy Parenting Handbook. Look up the podcast wherever you listen to your podcasts. Please leave a review, my friends, as that helps other parents who need this information to find us. And of course, subscribe. That's a huge help. You can also look for our shorts as a reel on Instagram at Katie Kimball Kids Cook, or subscribe to the Healthy Parenting Handbook Shorts channel on YouTube. You'll get those bite-sized portions of healthy parenting advice.